Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
It's that time of the week again, and it's your two favorite hosts, Justin Gay and Eric Nesbit, back with another edition of Talk Back. We've got the latest news in the world of sports, a lot of NFL action, a lot of NBA preseason action to come at you tonight. But Justin, over the weekend, UFC 229, there was a lot of buildup. Khabib against Conor. It was kind of an embarrassment. Now, we don't cover MMA on this show, as our listeners well know, but I had to just kick off the show, Justin, with you as we do this little teaser before we get into the heavy action and the heavy lifting in the NFL and on the court in the NBA. I'm looking at Conor McGregor. Dana White says this is no big deal. There's a lot of things going on. We're not even going to talk about the ruckus that happened after the fight. Is this the beginning of the end of Conor McGregor? He hasn't won a fight in a couple years in the octagon. He had his little stint there with the marketing bonanza that was in the boxing ring, and he lost that. He looked terrible in this fight. Justin, from the outside looking in, as two guys that just barely follow MMA, and it's only really when things are hot and heavy in the pay-per-view world that we kind of catch notice of it. What's the track look like for Conor McGregor now?
Well, I think in looking at the pay-per-view, the buy rate, I think he still must have some life because as of Monday, Dana White said they were well over 2 million pay-per-views, and I don't think they're going to hit the 3 million buy rate that they were looking for prior to the fight, but that's a lot of pay-per-views. So it was still a big night for UFC, even with McGregor losing, and he's still the biggest draw for him. He is supposed to have topped out at about $50 million plus on this fight with the back-end pay-per-view money. So I think he's going to continue to fight in the UFC for a while until he gets to a point where if he just continues to lose, then all the circus around him probably doesn't have the same panache as it did, but people still like him. He's still the biggest name in MMA, and regardless of what he wants to do later on, if he would go the Brock Lesnar route, maybe end up in WWE or even follow what Ronda Rousey did. But right now, he's such a huge draw. And listen to a couple interviews, his goal is to be the first MMA fighter to get a 9-figure payday. That's something that he wants. So a rematch possibly on the horizon. I could see the buy rates way up for it, especially like you said, with the post-fight antics that took place. You could see people wanting to get back into it. There's a lot of bad blood between these two. They played it up well, and the buy rate was there. So I don't think he's done yet, not by any stretch. I think it would have to be several more fights where he just wasn't competitive. He was taken out in the first round or early in fights where people felt like they were wasting their money. But when you get 3 or 4 rounds in UFC, plus the other cards you get, that's a pretty good night.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It would have to come down to the marketability. I didn't think the quality of the fight was all that good. And then the further on you get down the road, I mean, he wanted a rematch basically right away. That's kind of a bad look for the UFC. I mean, it's hard to justify a rematch when the one guy just absolutely got it handed to him for 4 rounds. But like you said, if it sells tickets, that's probably all that Conor and Dana care about. It's going to be hard to reach that 9-figure payday, though, if you're on a downturn. I, like you, think that maybe the WWE, possibly some acting, something more in the entertainment world is what's going to be on his horizon, because there just isn't that many more fights that you can withstand losing in the UFC, because then that ticket rate does drop way off. We saw that with Ronda Rousey. It's going to be interesting. We'll certainly follow that. We'll see if he gets a rematch with Khabib. Who knows? Maybe he'll actually win the title and turn this whole thing right around. But Justin, you know what's not turning around is the Philadelphia Eagles season. I know you're going to kick us off in segment 1, NFL, talking about those Philadelphia Eagles. A lot of other talk-worthy news in the NFL. And then we are very excited as two huge NBA fans that the action on the court is starting to get exciting. Most teams have 2, 3, 4 games into their preseason. We're not seeing a lot of competitive games, but, it's preseason. What matters is that the NBA action is coming to us very soon, and that's something that we're always excited about each and every year. That's going to be all segment 2 on episode 220 of Talk Back.
We're back, and it's all NFL here in segment 1. Eric, I know you're under the weather. You're fighting through on this episode, and I have to start piling on you early here in the show because your defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles are off to a bit of a rocky start. Now just 2-3. It came out earlier this week that Jay Ajayi is done for the season. He has a torn ACL. In their preview show, Eric, we talked about the big question was last year, the Philadelphia Eagles, they kind of came out of nowhere. They were the unexpected team. Then they lost their quarterback. They got to play the underdog card. Lane Johnson running around in the dog mask after games. No one respected them, and they got themselves a Super Bowl title. Now they are the hunted. Everybody comes at them with their best shot. They don't seem to be responding well. Doug Peterson even had some comments this week talking about that, their response and their energy and how they're practicing not translating to the field. So, Eric, let me ask you, I know you're an Eagles fan. You've watched this team as close as anybody. So is this team in a Super Bowl hangover, or is there something else at play here that has you concerned?
I'm going to have to say it's a little bit of both. There's definitely a Super Bowl hangover going on, and I was hoping that wouldn't happen. It's common to think that Nick Foles just really didn't like being the starter, and I mean that throughout his career. So if you look at Nick Foles as the guy that came in and relieved other quarterbacks for Philadelphia in the past, let's say, he did really well in that come on in, play the hero role, which is the role he played last year when Carson Wentz went out. If you look at his history of teams that put him in the starting role, a la a Rams, or it just doesn't work for him. Now he starts this season as the pressure number 1 on the depth chart QB, and it looks like the Nick Foles of the St. Louis days. I just don't understand what it is for him mentally, so I think that they got off to a really slow start, especially offensively. The running back crew without Blount there definitely looks different. They just don't look to have the same firepower out of the backfield that they had last year. Now, just last week, when we were talking about Le'Veon Bell, should the Philadelphia Eagles go after him, pursue him, I was really high on Jay Ajayi, saying, hey, he got us there last year. Let's stick with him. There was some pretty bad news this week. He tore his ACL. He's out for the year. So now we've got Carson Wentz back. We as a Philadelphia Eagles nation, he looks a little slow, but hopefully that's going to continue to improve throughout the season. And just as he's getting up and ready to go for the next couple of weeks, we lose Ajayi. So I just don't know where this is all going to fit in for the Philadelphia Eagles. They just offensively don't look very good. The other thing that concerns me, I had a listener actually text me this today that it came out from Brett Whitefield that the Philadelphia Eagles have 4 players with 20 total pressures or more. No other team has more than 1. So on their defense, Fletcher Cox has 27, Chris Long has 23, Michael Bennett 22, and Brandon Graham 21. The things they're doing on the pass rush on defense are phenomenal. I mean, just absurd the way that they're getting pressure to the other team's quarterbacks and in the backfield, stopping the run, really exposing the weaknesses of other offenses. They're not getting blown out, but Justin, they're not winning games. So despite this defensive presence, what concerns me is that starting the season with Foles and now the last couple weeks with Wentz in there, those wheels just aren't in motion. Now you lose Ajayi. So the long answer to the short question that you had is, am I concerned at 2-3 for these Philadelphia Eagles? Yeah, I really am, especially in, I know you're going to talk about in a minute, in that NFC East. It's a bit of a mess, but 2-3 still isn't going to cut it.
So let me ask you, you talked about Ajayi being out. We talked about on the show last week, there was some rumblings that maybe the Eagles would be aggressive, pull the trigger on a Le'Veon Bell trade. That got shot down over the weekend, but a trade rumor that is out there is the Eagles have contacted the Bills about LaShawn McCoy. So are you in favor of them trying to bring in a guy like Shady McCoy for even a year as sort of a stopgap till they get Ajayi back, or if they decide not to re-sign Ajayi next year to be able to work something out with McCoy? What's your thoughts on that?
It's going to be a little bit of personal versus professional. Personally, I've been kind of down on McCoy the last couple years. I didn't like the breakup with the Eagles. I didn't like how that all transpired and how he handled that. Then you've got this cloud over him with his ex-girlfriends and how that really, domestically is all playing out. We still don't know how that's going to become finalized, although they say that there's really no evidence to pursue a criminal case against Shady McCoy. But you never know if those things kind of change and mold throughout the season. So do you give up a lot to bring him in and then in week 9 or week 10 find out that Goodell's going to suspend him for the rest of the season for something off the field that they're investigating? There's a lot of unknowns there. Personally, I just don't like him. I don't like who he's become. I don't like his attitude. So professionally, from the football field standpoint, the Eagles are going to have to do something with Ajayi out and no Blount. I think you just need a better runner than what you've got either in Smallwood or Clement or Sproles. Their offense was built differently. So you've got to have an RB1. I think that's really where those questions are stemming from. So if it's not a Bell and if it's not a McCoy, it's got to be someone. But if the price is right on McCoy, I'd be willing to do it for a year as an Eagles fan.
Well, they redid Fletcher Cox deal to free up quite a bit of money in cap space, and there seems to be a reason they did that. McCoy has this year and the next year, he's a $9 million cap hit. So I don't think that's absurd. Again, we talked about Wentz being under that rookie scale. And if they have the cap room, I think he's a pretty good fit. Doesn't seem like there's anything criminal yet that we've seen. It's not been in the court systems. We know how long that stuff can take. I think he'd be okay for this season unless a videotape or something crazy came out of left field that we didn't expect. But I think he could help this team, Eric. Offensively, what I see is they just don't look nearly as dynamic as they did last year. They look much more vanilla. The offensive line doesn't look good. That Tennessee game, Wentz got just demolished. It seemed like every time he dropped back, he had pressure in his face. He was taking big shots, and the Vikings pretty much controlled the game on Sunday. So the Eagles definitely have some work to do. Lucky for them, they're in a division that just saw the Washington Redskins get pounded on Monday Night Football in New Orleans, and still Washington sits atop the NFC East at 2-2. Everybody's worse than that. You have the Cowboys at 2-3, the Eagles we just talked about at 2-3, the Giants at 1-4. So, Eric, 5 games in, is the NFC East the worst division in football?
Kind of strange, since a few weeks back we said it might be one of the strongest divisions in the NFC. It's definitely not.
That prediction looks great.
Yeah, so if we lose a few listeners over that, I would understand. No, I think the Eagles turn it around. I think ultimately Dallas wins a few more games. I think the Redskins are better than what they're putting out there. The same thing they had last year. They just seem to find ways to lose games. I know this last week was a blowout, but they played the Saints and they played a motivated Drew Brees for certain reasons. So, yeah, I understand where you're coming from with that question. The Giants are just extremely disappointing. I don't know what's going to happen there. Probably fodder for a different show. I think even the players are getting frustrated with what's going on with Eli Manning. I think you're starting to see Odell, get frustrated again, which once he got paid, you knew the frustration would come if the losing came. So, he's safe. He's now got his contract. Once you start losing games, he's free to really run his mouth. So I think it gets ugly and worse in New York before it gets better. Now, the Giants play the Eagles coming up here. And so I would hope that that's a game that the Eagles could bounce back and win. That really puts the Giants way out of it. If what I want to happen happens, the Giants would be 1-5. I think you'd call that season over. And then you start to wonder what they do at quarterback for the remainder of the year. That could get interesting. But the Eagles, Cowboys, I think they both win a few more games. We'll see what the Redskins do. But yeah, you look at the fact that the Rams are 5-0. You look at the Saints at 4-1. You look at the Bears at 3-1. It's hard to argue that the NFC East wouldn't be the worst division in the NFC.
Yeah, for sure. When you look at all the other divisions, there's at least one, it seems, powerhouse in that division, or one team you can sort of hang your hat on. Even as bad as the NFC West is, it still has the Rams in it. There's not that team that's really in the NFC East at this point. Again, we're 5 weeks in. We're not even a third way through the season, but it's just interesting because, and I think looking back, it's jokingly what we said there. We thought the Eagles would be good. But we both thought the Redskins would hover around 8-8. They're 2-2 now, so they're right on pace for that. We both took the under on Dallas, that we thought they would be under 500 because they didn't improve this team and their wide receivers are not that great, not that dynamic.